Right, hello everyone. Hope this is working. I think I say this every week. I've had so many bad experiences with this. Um, Welcome everyone to the Friday Night Live. So obviously just me on tonight. I've got a few questions left over from last week when we had Jen on, because obviously with a guest it's a bit more difficult to get through all the questions. So I've got a few left over from then, and then a few questions from the post that I put in the group yesterday. So I'll get right on with it. The first one, I think this was from last week, but it's in the early stages of alcohol-free. Do you recommend staying away from trigger places like bars and restaurants, or instead continuing to go to those places as usual and learning to cope and power through alcohol-free? It has been easier to avoid these places with COVID, but things are easing up in my area and I'm now vaccinated. So I'll be back in the world of temptation rather than home where we are keeping all alcohol out. Thank you. Um, so I think a few things to say. Firstly, with regard triggers, you can't avoid them. There was quite a lot about this in the group the other day anyway, but you cannot avoid triggers. The reason people don't like triggers is because triggers make you think about drinking, which leads to craving, which leads to relapse. I go into quite a lot of detail. It's in Alcohol Explained 1 and 2 and on the website about that thought process. And actually, the best way to disrupt it isn't to come, not to try to avoid all triggers, which is virtually impossible, but rather when the thought of an alcoholic drink comes into your head, there's ways and means of disrupting that so that it doesn't become a craving. A craving is basically fantasizing about how nice it would be to have a drink. Okay, so the thought of having a drink doesn't necessarily lead to a craving. So I would say you need to do what's right for you. If you're not comfortable going to those places early on, then don't. But you're going to have to go to them at some point. Personally, I would rather get things done. I don't like waiting around with things. So I would rather just get out, face the challenges, and have them done. Um, but as I say, it is very personal. And I think it is a bit of a strange time at the moment with COVID, because obviously for a lot of people, the tough things are going out for drinks with friends, going out for meals, going on holiday, that kind of thing. And of course, no one's really doing much of that at the moment anyway. So it is a bit strange. But what I would say is try to live as normal a life as you would anyway. So I would certainly wouldn't be avoiding places, but caveat that, because if you're not feeling strong enough, then it probably is worth waiting. So sort of a bit of a personal thing there. Um, the next question is one I've never had. It's quite unusual to get a question that's never been asked. Everyone says about their weight loss on alcohol-free phase, but what about those who are already underweight? How do they put on when calorie count decreases being alcohol-free? So it's one of the rare individuals who's struggling with being underweight rather than being overweight. Um, so I would say a few things. When you put on weight with alcohol, it tends to be fat rather than muscle. So it's not the kind of weight you want to be putting on anyway. I think if you're underweight, you don't want to be ramping up reams and reams of body fat. You probably want to be bulking up with a bit of muscle. The best way of doing that is to do some weight exercise. And if you do that, your hunger will naturally increase anyway. Which is a far better way of putting on weight than just consuming loads of excess calories through empty calories through alcohol, which will erode your fitness, erode your muscle, and just put on body fat. So that's not really something you want to be aiming for anyway. The next question, could you talk about caffeine and its ill effects? I seem to recall you saying that you quit caffeine. I feel like I'm drinking more diet caffeinated drinks instead of alcohol, and I can tell it's not great for me. Thank you. So I haven't actually given up caffeine, but I've managed to cut out coffee and I just drink tea now, and I find it causes that kind of less of that feeling uptight and slightly bad tempered, which is not an ideal thing to have when you have shut up for months on end with two young children. So I think the point here, and it's an overarching point, is when we drink, we become very, very used to reaching for something to consume it, to change how we feel. And the temptation is then when we quit, to start just reaching for the next thing. So you can't have a drink, so you reach for a diet caffeinated drink. So the caffeine is going to make you feel slightly uptight and unpleasant anyway. It's going to stop you sleeping properly. So it's not a good combination. So I would say, yes, you try to cut it out as much as you can. If you are drinking caffeine, try not to have it later in the day because it will ruin sleep. And don't forget, you need to be quitting drinking, not because it's a penance, but for the great benefits that sobriety brings. One of the greatest of which is to wake up feeling refreshed and ready to start the day, which you're not going to be doing if you're demolishing your sleep and ruining it through too much caffeine. It won't do as much damage as alcohol, but it's still not putting you in the best position, which is to wake up feeling fantastic. So what you need to try and get away from is that I've given up alcohol, so I'm just going to reach for the next thing to consume to take its place. So yeah, try and cut them out. I think someone put a comment on a bit later as well, that if you feel like you need something to sort of make you feel better, there's a lot of things you can do to achieve that without consuming something, be it alcohol or cigarettes or food or whatever. So, look forward to sitting down with a good book, or just relaxing of an evening, or, get some kind of hobby or pastime that you really enjoy. And that can be the thing, but yeah, try to get out of the habit of just consuming the next thing to change how you feel. Anything on sleep, please, particularly falling asleep. I'm 3 months in and still struggle. So that is not alcohol related. If you have stopped drinking for 3 months, you're physiologically back to normal at that point. I know people talk about pause. That's a whole separate issue. But you are physiologically back to normal after 3 months. So it might be that you have an underlying sleep problem, in which case you might want to speak to a doctor about it. But look at the obvious things. Caffeine is a stimulant and it will keep you awake. So is nicotine. So if you smoke or vape, that will impact things. It could be, so things that can help you sleep is don't eat a massive meal late at night, because that can really interfere with how you're sleeping. And if you can, try to do some exercise, but exercise early in the day, because exercise releases endorphins and adrenaline and pumps oxygen around your body, so it makes you feel awake. So try and exercise early in the morning, and any exercise you can do will help you sleep. So there's some tips to try and help you sleep. But if you're still struggling, you might have an underlying sleeping issue, so it might be worth speaking to a doctor. So this is a good one. I've just finished reading Allen Carr's Stop Drinking Now, which I also found useful alongside your books. I know you mentioned this chap in one of your books. I just wanted your opinion on his technique, if you like. I just want the desire, fantasy of drinking alcohol to be removed for good. As you know, we're in lockdown here, but I'd love to go out sober a few times to build up some real confidence. So Allen Carr paved the way for me and for most other people, to be quite honest. He started off writing about smoking, and what he developed was a method whereby it's almost like a sort of a miracle cure. He called it the easy way. But what it does is it just takes the smoker on a fairly pragmatic and logical analysis of smoking and explodes all the myths about it and demonstrates that there's absolutely nothing to it, so that when you actually come to quit, you're quite happy to quit. And the reason it's so successful is because the backbone of any addiction is craving. Okay, that's that overpowering feeling we have that we really want something. Now, going back to what I was talking about with triggers, a craving, you can break it down into its simple thought processes. And if you're not sure about this, go onto the website. I've done quite a detailed article on this. But the thought of say a cigarette or a drink enters your mind, and then you start fantasizing about how nice it will be. But if you, as soon as that thought enters your mind, use it as a reminder of how lucky you are to be free, then you don't actually crave. And that's what Allen Carr discovered, basically. I don't think he quite articulated it in that way, but he found this way of looking at smoking and following these simple instructions. The most important one was, as soon as the thought of a cigarette enters your head, just remind yourself how lucky you are to be free and how great it is to no longer have to smoke. And so lots of people did this, and suddenly they weren't craving cigarettes. So absolutely, Allen Carr's fantastic, and he paved the way. I personally felt that his Stop Drinking book didn't hit the right points. He says that there's no physical withdrawal from alcohol, and I absolutely think there is. he said that when we start drinking, the reason it's hard to stop is because it dehydrates you, so it makes you thirsty for another drink. Now, I don't believe that at all. I never drank an alcoholic drink because I was thirsty. I was always reaching for the next one because I was starting to feel unpleasant and I wanted another one to make me feel good again. I read his autobiography, and in that he said he didn't want to write the drinking book. He didn't feel equipped to do it, so he asked a lot of other people to do it. None of them did a particularly good job, so he ended up doing it himself. Someone else who knew him has subsequently told me that he actually didn't write it himself. It was someone else that wrote it. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I do think, brilliant as he was and clever that his system was, I don't think, for me, it didn't quite ring true with drinking. And I think that's possibly where it fell down for me. But yeah, no, I absolutely, and to be honest, Alcohol Explained is based on that simple premise that you just analyze it to pieces, dispel all the nonsense about it, and look at what's left. And the answer is not much. So if you can get into that correct mindset, it makes quitting very, very easy. So can you give your opinion on the Sinclair method? So the Sinclair method, as I understand it, is an opiate blocker. So it's a drug you take. And the idea is that when you drink alcohol, it doesn't have any particular effect on you. It doesn't feel particularly good. So you take the drug, continue drinking, and you're almost reversing that subconscious association between having a drug and having a drink and feeling good. Okay. The problems with it are several. Firstly, it's massively misunderstood to such an extent that people actually take it and don't continue drinking, thinking that it removes cravings. It does absolutely nothing of the sort. The only way, and this is the people who came up with the method, say you have to take it and drink. It's the combination. It's not some magic pill that stops you craving. Some people will say, I took it and I didn't crave. But actually, all that really does is prove that it's a psychological process, because the drug that is involved in the Sinclair method does absolutely nothing to stop you craving. So it really is just a placebo if it stops people craving, purely because they're not then fantasizing about about having a drink. The second thing is it is a drug and it affects different people in different ways. Some people say it's fantastic, it solved my problem. Far more people say various things, one of which is it made me incredibly ill, even when I wasn't drinking. Other people just drank their way through it anyway. So I've never tried it. Most people I've spoken to haven't got a huge amount of good to say about it. But having said that, that's what you'd expect, because if they tried it and it worked, they probably wouldn't have continued looking and found Alcohol Explained. So that's my view on it for what it's worth. There's been a lot of discussion around regrets and feeling sad about embarrassing things done in the past. It might be beyond the scope of what you'd feel comfortable discussing, but perhaps you can add some of your valuable personal perspective, having been sober for a solid chunk of time. So for me, and I think this might be in one of the books, but so we as human beings are responsible for what we do. Okay. But if you take a drug that changes how your brain works, you're not responsible for what you do. So to give an silly example, if you're just a normal, decent person, but there's a drug that makes you go completely berserk and kill someone, okay, just imagine that hypothetically that's possible. If you deliberately take that drug knowing what will happen and you kill someone, then you're responsible for that person's death because you took the drug in full knowledge of what it would do. However, if someone spiked your drink with it and you didn't take it deliberately, it was sort of forced upon you and you went mad and killed someone, for me, I'd say you're not morally responsible for that person's death because you didn't knowingly take that drug. Okay, alcohol makes us do stupid and dreadful things, even if we're not stupid and dreadful people. It's the nature of the drug. It interferes with how our brains work. Okay, we don't take it in full knowledge of that because it's not sold to us as drink this and you're going to go out and do some abysmal and terrible things. It's sold to us and we drink it because we see all these images of people drinking it and it's funny and it's fun and it's a social lubricant. So for me, people who drink often drink in ignorance, so they're not always culpable, they're not always responsible for what they do. And that's just how I see things. And this may not be a particularly positive positive thing, and people might disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. But the fact of the matter is, if you drink and you do something stupid, you fine if you want to take responsibility for it, but I think you need to give yourself a bit of a break, because most people drink without truly appreciating, for example, how alcohol affects our emotions and stops us being able to regulate our emotions, such that something minor happens to make us lose our temper and we turn into a full fit of rage and just can't control our temper. That's not something wrong with us. That's due to the nature of the drug that we've been drinking. So that's my view on it. If you've done embarrassing and stupid things when you've been drinking, you need to cut yourself a bit of slack for that, because when you drank it, you didn't know that you would have done that. And when you did do it, it's not you. That's not the real you. This is another myth that people say, you know, when you're drinking, it's the real you that comes out. It's absolute rubbish. Alcohol prevents your brain from acting normally. One of the ways it does that is to anesthetize the regulators in your brain, which regulate emotions. So your brain becomes incapable of stopping the emotion. So any emotion that gets triggered off just runs amok. So, you know, that's why drinkers are so introspective and teary, and there's a lot of violent crime associated with drinking. It's because people can't regulate their emotions when they're drinking. Okay, so I don't know what you've done, but I would just say cut yourself a bit of slack. The only thing you can do is to make sure it never happens again by not drinking. And having taken that step, as far as I'm concerned, you've done all you need to do to absolve yourself. This is an interesting one. What are the upsides of alcohol and drinking? Can you please list your 5 favorite positives? I request this not to be provocative, but to draw attention to however minor, insignificant, or pathetic or otherwise any of these benefits may be. Then perhaps you could list your 5 favorite negatives of alcohol. It's an interesting question. I genuinely can't come up with 5, because the kind of things that people would say, well, it helps you socialize. You know, I go to a lot of detail in the books explaining how that isn't the case. So, for example, with socializing, any human being, when they are relaxed and socializing, their brain releases endorphins, and you relax into it and really enjoy social occasions. Okay. Alcohol, because it anesthetizes inhibitions, when you're drinking at a social occasion, it can bring about that endorphin rush a bit quicker. And because we often start drinking at social occasions, we start to confuse the two. So we think an endorphin rush is actually an alcohol buzz, but it isn't at all. So, and other people will say, well, it helps me get to sleep. Well, it doesn't if you drink regularly. So for any normal person, when they go towards bedtime, their brain starts to close things down so you can fall asleep. If you're drinking every night, your brain just stops doing it. It doesn't need to, because it's got the sedating effects of alcohol. So that when you stop drinking, or you don't drink for a night, you find it very hard to fall asleep, because it takes a few nights for your brain to get back into doing that job. So again, that isn't a positive. So, and I think that's one of the points about alcohol. All the positives that you care to list are all nonsense. Now, genuinely, I can think of 2 genuine positives to it. The first is, if you are nervous or scared, it will take the edge off that, because it's a sedative, in the same way a whack of heroin would take the edge off it. Okay. Again, you can query whether it's actually a positive, because fear and nervousness is there for a reason, and it's there to protect us. So anesthetizing it isn't necessarily a good thing to do. And then, of course, the other problem with alcohol is, as it wears off, it leaves a corresponding feeling of anxiety. So you're not actually gaining anything anyway. But that's the one thing. The other thing I think is a genuine, because I've noticed it myself, is I get cold much more than I used to. Okay, so the reason for that is, when you're drinking, you're taking on a massive amount of excess calories. Alcohol as an energy source can't be stored by the body. So when you're drinking lots of alcohol, your body has to burn it up, and the only way it can do that with an excess is to turn it into heat. So when you're drinking a lot, you become warm. Now, of course, the knock-on effects of that is several reasons, but alcohol anesthetizes the sensors that tell you when you're full, because it's a sedative, you actually end up eating more, and it causes a release of dopamine. Now, dopamine is very confused by a lot of people who think it's like endorphins, and they say that dopamine makes you feel good. It doesn't. Dopamine's like a stimulant, and it makes you want to go and do things, which is why people tend to overeat when they're hungry. So because of all these things, because alcohol makes you hot, because you're taking on a load of excess calories, because it makes you overeat, you tend to get fat and have too many calories all the time, which leaves you hot. So again, that's the one thing. I've been colder at winter. I always used to think I didn't feel the cold. What I didn't realize was it was just because I was consuming so much in the way of calories and alcohol all the time as a direct result of my drinking, that I just didn't feel cold at all. So they're the only two. I cannot genuinely think of a third, let alone a five, to add to that list. And the 5 favorite negatives of alcohol, it's almost endless, to be honest. One of my all-time favorite things is waking up feeling ready to go. I used to hate waking up in the middle of the night feeling anxious and exhausted at the same time. I love the feeling of being fitter and stronger. I love the feeling of having my mental resilience back, because don't forget, when alcohol wears off, it leaves a chemical imbalance in your brain. And that chemical imbalance just leaves you feeling less mentally resilient. You just don't feel able to get to grips with the day-to-day problems in life. They just overpower you a lot easier. The saying, throwing your toys out the pram, that's what drinkers do. Just things get on top of them a lot easier, and they have their little tantrums, and it all gets a bit too much, because they're not sleeping properly, and the alcohol's leaving a chemical imbalance. So yeah, I can't genuinely come up with 5 positives to it. As I say, those 2 are the only genuine ones I can come up with. So hi, William, you asked me to remind you, please, to put a plug in for the group Zoom chat social gatherings for all Alcohol Explained members. A chance to get to know other members, discuss how their weeks have gone, have a giggle, discuss your book, ask questions and advice, anything. There are currently 2 sessions available, a fortnightly one. Hold on. Right, fortnightly one, best times for the UK and European members, and a later one, better time for US, Canada, and the Americas. The US Western Hemisphere time sessions are every Monday, Tuesday mid-morning and late morning in Australia, dependent on time zones, and fortnightly for the UK and European and Europe Eastern Hemisphere time sessions. The next UK Euro one is 22nd of February, US this coming Monday and every Monday, unless otherwise stated, at an earlier time than the US session. All events always appear in the events section of the Alcohol Explained Facebook group. So please ask members regularly, check the events section for up-to-date details. The more the merrier. That is a really good point. And I would strongly recommend anyone to jump on those. You don't need to talk. You don't need to have your camera on. You can just go in and listen. It's really informal. I've not managed to get on one myself. I always mean to. But one of them's at midnight and one of them's at 7 in the evening, which is not ideal with 2 young kids in the house. But I keep meaning to try and do this. But I would urge anyone to try and have a go at this. As I say, you don't need to go on and talk. It's not like you pass around and you have to introduce yourself. You can go on, leave your camera off, leave your mic off if you want, and just listen for a bit and see how you go. But I think these are a fantastic idea, particularly when we're in lockdown at the moment. And also, don't forget, one of the big things with not drinking is, for a lot of us, because so many people drink, you kind of feel like you're out on your own a bit. And that's why it's so important to have a community. The Facebook group is great, but a bit of face-to-face contact as well, I think, can never hurt. Apologies if this has already been covered, but maybe something on what you have as a treat when stop drinking. When you stop drinking, you realize how everything makes you feel. I gave up coffee when I realized how anxious it really made me, which is exactly what I did. And then I gave up sweet stuff when I became addicted to that instead. I know a healthy lifestyle is its own reward, etc., but sometimes I miss a treat. I'm running out of vices. So I would firstly say the reason we give up these treats is because they're not treats and they're not particularly pleasant. And we know that, like, for example, a cup of coffee and it leaves you feeling anxious. So why are you having it? So I would stop looking at these things as treats anyway, but also you don't have to eat something for a treat. Okay, I really like at the moment just putting the kids to bed and just having a bit of peace and quiet. And for me, that's like, it's opening a book and just sitting with a book for a bit, or messaging a friend or something. You don't have to be putting something in your mouth for it to be a treat. So yeah, just get away from the consuming thing treats and do other treats, like give yourself a film or a book, or, you know, a bit of time on a hobby you enjoy or something like that. The next one's an interesting one. Wine being from grapes, how does it become ethanol, a poison? I'm just confused on that. Thank you. So my interest in alcohol is more how it makes us feel and how it becomes addictive. So I have no particular experience or expertise in fermentation. My understanding of it, and I'm going to go back to this is what I learned in school as a teen or even preteen. So feel free to tell me it's completely wrong, but my basic understanding of it is you get a bacteria, which is yeast. So yeast is a bacteria, okay? And like every living creature on the planet, it consumes and excretes. So we eat food and drink, and we then excrete excrement and urine. Okay, so yeast consumes sugar, and it excretes two things: carbon dioxide and alcohol. Okay, so what you do is you get some hops or some wine or just some grape juice or anything. That's why you can make wine out of pear juice or anything. And you put yeast in it and you leave it, and the yeast eats the sugar and it poos out ethanol and carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's why if you get some hops and water and put yeast in it and put a airtight top on it, it will end up being fizzy because it creates carbon dioxide. So you end up with fizzy drinks. Something like wine, however, if you leave it so that the carbon dioxide can come out, so you don't stopper it up, it ends up flat because the carbon dioxide comes out. So that's it. When you're drinking alcohol, you're actually eating bacteria poo. That's what it is. It's the waste product from bacteria. Okay, this is also why, because no creature on the planet, for any creature on the planet, its waste product is poisonous to it. Okay, so if, for example, a human were to strange concept, but it would kill us if we were to eat our own excrement. Okay, it's not good for us. So this is the same with yeast. So it will eat the sugar and it will excrete carbon dioxide and alcohol. But when the alcohol gets to a certain level, it actually kills the yeast. So that's why alcoholic drinks, beer is slightly less strong because there's less sugar in hops. But the wine, because there's more sugar in grapes, it will only ever get up to about 12, 13, 14%. At that level, it kills the yeast. So the only way you can make spirits is to distill it. So alcohol has a different boiling point to water. So if you get a big thing of wine and boil it off, the alcohol will evaporate off it first. So you catch that liquid off it, and then that's pure alcohol. So then you distill things to make them stronger. So as I say, that might be completely wrong, but that's my limited understanding. And that's also why I kind of, it's ridiculous because people will say, well, you know, alcohol is a really important part of society. People have been drinking for, you know, they found beer jugs in ancient Babylon from like 4,000 years ago. And, you know, it's this crucial part of our culture. It's like, no, it isn't at all. That's absolutely rubbish. Okay, there's one reason and one reason alone that it's such a massive part of our culture, and that's because it's easy to make. Okay, it's not like methamphetamines where you need all these chemicals and fertilizers and this chemical laboratory or whatever, and you end up burning yourself to death in some, I don't know, desert in Utah because you've got your van there that you're trying to make it from. It's really easy with alcohol. You just need rotten fruit and vegetables. Okay, it's not a crucial part of society in any more way than suicide is a crucial part of our society. That's been with humankind since the beginning of time as well. Ridiculous thing to say. It's just there because it's so easy to make. My husband's heavy drinking is making him slow in general. Is he dry drunk or brain damaged? Am I the only one here a year into alcohol-free life watching someone drink themselves feeble? Sorry, it's just the word feeble. No, I mean, so dry drunk is I think someone who isn't drinking but exhibits all the bad temper and rest of it that comes with drinking. So I'm not sure dry drunk's quite the right phrase. But yes, it will make people slow. It's a sedative at the end of the day, and it ruins your sleep. So over the years, it will make you slow. There is, of course, something as well. You can get brain damage from drinking too much. So alcohol stops the body absorbing certain vitamins, one of which is zinc. And over years and years, if you haven't got any zinc, it ends up brain damaging you, and that's what alcoholic brain damage is. It's a zinc deficiency over years and years and years. So yes, it absolutely can do. And of course it ruins sleep, and we really don't understand the effect of long-term sleep deprivation has on mental processes, but absolutely it slows them down. So yeah, I don't know, it can't be particularly pleasant. It's not nice because we have these great ideas that alcohol is very glamorous, and when we stop and watch other people do it, it's not at all. It's quite an unpleasant thing to watch someone doing. And in fact, the next question, would love to hear strategies on how to deal with a spouse that still drinks. Mine is very supportive of me not drinking and is happy for me, but he has no desire to quit or slow down himself. I don't, I'm not very good at this side of things, relationships and the like. So I don't know. Or you just make sure that your own sobriety is something that you do for yourself because it's right for you and it gives you a massively improved quality of life. And if some feeble-minded person wants to continue hurting themselves, then there's not a lot you can do. You can offer them support, and you can be an example to them to hopefully show them how much better life is when you do quit. But a lot of people just bury their heads in the sand. It does take quite a lot of imagination and courage to suddenly stop in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, having put in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, dedication, health, money, everything to this particular drug, to then suddenly stop and think to yourself, hang on, this isn't right. And not only is it not right, but I've actually got the courage and foresight and guts to do something about it. And not many people do that, which is again genuinely why I believe that people who have admitted they've got a problem with alcohol or just don't like it anymore and stop, we shouldn't be judging ourselves and thinking that we're worse than so-called normal drinkers, because the fact of the matter is that it's the normal drinkers who just can't, they haven't got the courage or the imagination to imagine life without alcohol. So they bury their head in the sand and they just keep banging away at it. Those of us who have stopped are the ones who do have that imagination and courage. And we should be fiercely proud of ourselves for having done it, particularly in a society where something like 87% of people drink. It is a courageous thing to do to quit. So yeah, it can't be very nice. I mean, my wife still drinks, but not very much. What can you do? Silently judge people is the best bet. Tends to be something we're quite good at generally in England anyway, and I think it works fairly well. So I think this is the last question. Why am I being flooded with memories that used to not bother me, or things I thought I'd let go of a long time ago? I'm thinking and rehashing moments where I could have been better, done something different, and now feel upset with myself. I was never ashamed of myself before, now I am. These memories are not earth-shattering things, just daily things in life. So what I would be very interested to know there is where you are with quitting drinking, because if it's within the first week or so there will be a chemical imbalance. So don't forget, the basic physiological process is that alcohol is a sedative, but your brain reacts to it by becoming oversensitive, so it can work under the sedating effects of the alcohol. So when the alcohol wears off, it's left overstimulated. So if you get a sedating or relaxing feeling from alcohol, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When it wears off, there's a corresponding feeling of anxiety. The more you're drinking and the longer you've been drinking for, the more extreme that chemical balance is, and the longer it takes to get back to normal when you quit. Okay, there's lots and lots of symptoms of this chemical imbalance, but the biggest and most unpleasant one is that everything looks more difficult. So I always say, imagine problems come marked out of 10 from obviously 1 to 10. So 1 are the really minor, easy things to deal with, and 10 are the really difficult, groundbreaking, horrible things. Okay, most normal, mentally resilient people can deal with anything up to a 6 or 7 fairly easily. What alcohol does is it erodes your ability to cope, so that you can no longer cope with the 7s or the 6s or the 5s, and suddenly even the 4s and 3s start to look too big. Everything looks massively problematic. And that's why there's this wrong, completely erroneous way of approaching it, that you have to deal with the underlying problems before you quit drinking. So people are drinking and they blame their jobs, their family life, their partners, their kids, all these different things. And people will say to them, well, you need to sort that out because that's the reason that you're drinking. That's completely incorrect. You need to stop drinking first, because for the majority of people, these things that are worrying them and causing them loads of angst when they're drinking, actually they're still there when they stop drinking, but the person finds they can deal with them. They're manageable problems. And it's the alcohol. It doesn't actually allow you to cope with things. It removes your ability to cope with things and then partially restores it when you're drinking. Okay, so if you have just stopped drinking, you will be going through a withdrawal. And I think I say in the book, the hungover mind will find the most disturbing part of any panorama and focus in on it. Okay, and that's what you do when you have that chemical imbalance. There may be loads of good things in your life and one bad. You'll focus in on that bad thing and start to feel horrible about it. It's not a real perspective. It's just a chemical imbalance. So if you are only a few days, maybe a week or so having quit, I would say don't worry about it. Give it some time. Get back to sleeping normally. And you might well find that these things are just things that don't bother you. The other thing I think is worth mentioning is how we as human beings cope with things. When something happens terrible or unpleasant, we sit with it and we mull it over, and eventually we become used to it. Okay, it's like I sometimes give the example of like when you're wearing clothes. If you stop now and concentrate on the feel of your clothes, you can actually feel them touching your skin. But throughout the day, you're not consciously aware of it. If something is there all the time, you very soon become used to it and you cease being consciously aware of it. So when something terrible happens, it might take days, weeks, months, years, but eventually it becomes part of the background noise of your life, and you stop being consciously aware of it all the time. It's still there, but you live with it. When you're anesthetizing your way through things, that process doesn't happen. So it could be, a bad breakup or the death of a loved one or any one of a million things that ordinarily, if you weren't drinking, you would just get on with it and eventually you would come to terms with it. But when you're anesthetizing through it, you can't go through that process. So it might be not only the withdrawal, it could also be that if you've been drinking for several years, there's just a lot of things that you now need to sit with and basically come to terms with, just assimilate into your consciousness and into your being before you get used to them. I hope that was useful for everyone. So next week I've got Alex and Lisa on from Be Sober, which should be good fun. So we'll do some questions. We might not get through them all, but that's the plan for next week. And then that's it. So I hope that was useful for everyone. Have a good weekend, everyone, and I shall see you next week.